Hello, my friends. It's good to see you again. Oh man, I have given myself a challenging one today. So, this is a beautiful scene from Southeast Asia. Sunrise scene. You've got those iconic steep hills in the background, those limestone cliffs that just shoot straight up into the sky as the sun's coming up. Then you've got this beautiful blue smoke filling the air and giving this really hazy atmosphere, and then you've got the river underneath it. There is a lot to think about when going into a scene like this, because I really want to capture the atmosphere of that smoke. And I'm trying to think about the best way I can do that. It's gonna have to be a combination of lifting up paint with the brush, and then also probably use gouache to paint over top of things to get the smoke that's more on this side. You see how the smoke is a little sharper. The edges of the smoke are sharper and more clearly defined, and then on the right side, the smoke that's in front of that mountain is more fuzzy and soft. So that's something to think about. Then you've also got to think about capturing the color of the sun. It's going to be yellower up here, and then orange and red down here, and then all in this area as well. Then you've got the water underneath that. I decided not to include those foreground plants in this composition. I want the river to be the closest thing to the viewer, and I also don't think I'm going to include that palm tree on the upper right-hand side of the frame. I think that might distract from the smoke, which is kind of the main focus. Well, I guess it would be the sun, which is right in the center, is going to be the real main focus, and then the smoke is going to act as support for that. It'll also provide a really nice color contrast to the sun, which is warm and bright, and then that smoke is beautiful, cool, dark blues and grays. So, in order for this to work, I need to paint everything as smoothly and as quickly as I can. In the first wash, I need to really focus on toning the areas underneath the smoke with the correct color, and then also the sky. I want it to be a really smooth gradient. So wet into wet is going to be my best friend. I need the paper to actually be a little wetter than it normally would be if this is going to work, and I'm also going to be using this spray bottle probably a lot more. My paper tends to dry out very fast because I'm in Arizona and the air is always so very dry. So let me go ahead and pre-mix some colors, and then I'm going to wet down both sides of my paper with the sponge like I always do. Here's the brushes I'm using. The standard, you got your synthetic squirrel quill by Winsor and Newton, medium size. And I've got my Escoda Perla synthetic. I've got this Zen Art liner brush, faux squirrel. Then I've also got this other Zen Art, just, I'm not even sure what size this is. This is for lifting paint up and smoothing and blending. So this is kind of just a brush that I have on hand, on standby. Full materials list is in the description. Oh, Winsor and Newton paint. So, let me get to mixing some of these colors. The reason I want to mix them ahead of time is so I can just grab them and go. So, let me do that. Before I do that, I'm actually just going to reactivate some of this paint that's starting to dry out. I also keep these wet paper towels in this palette because it clamps together, and it's got a pretty good seal, but the paint obviously is still going to dry out. So this just helps preserve that fresh paint for longer, but if I spray it with this bottle, it reactivates just fine. So that way I'm not going through quite as much fresh paint. So let me mix. Also keep in mind, the sun, I want this area here to be pure white, the actual disk of the sun. So I need to paint around that. And in fact, I need to paint around it. I need to give it a little more space, because when the paint is wet and you're painting into wet paper, it will bleed. And so I need to make the circle a little bigger than it normally would be, because the paint will kind of creep in towards the center. You'll see what I mean. So I'm just going to mix up a bunch of warm colors for the sun, and then I'm going to try to see if I can mix up some cools for that under painting that's going around the smoke. Well, I think that'll give us a good starting point, at least. I did not do a value study for this because it's very obvious what the middle value shape is, since this is mostly just silhouettes that I'm dealing with here. So let me wet down this paper. All right. I would usually sop up some of that extra liquid, but in this case, I'm going to leave it just like it is, I think. Very wet, because I really want the paint to flow as effortlessly as it can, and I need it to stay wet for as long as it can. I've got my little spray bottle here on standby if I need to give it some more life. So here we go. I think this is going to turn out really cool. I'm kind of giving myself a challenge with this one. So there's that sun. Again, painting a bigger disc around it than it appears in the photo, because that paint is going to creep in towards the center. And then as it moves away from the sun, we'll just keep dropping in some light colors. I'll probably add some very faint grays at the very top of the sky. I mean, it's just so beautiful. What an amazing place. I really would love to go here at some point. And underneath, these beautiful reds. Paint some reds right into the side of the mountain, because this is light that's going to be kind of showing in front of the mountainside. At least that's the impression I'm trying to give. Darken up the rim of the sun at the bottom with really vibrant orange. I want the sunset to be fairly vibrant. Just heighten that color contrast between the warmth of the sun and the coolness of the smoke in the hills and the river. Get some more red. Some of the smoke is actually being directly lit by this sun, so it's warm. And this is all just what's going underneath the painting. Or I should say, these are light colors that are going underneath the darker colors that will be put on top. And because watercolor is transparent, this underpainting will show through. So I'm going to smooth this out a little bit. You see those little tendrils starting to creep in. I'm just taking a clean, damp brush and kind of trying to blend that in a little smoother, like that. That's why I have this spare brush on standby. I usually just have it either in this hand as I'm painting, like this, or I'll have it in my left hand. Okay, back to the sky. This is already a super engaging painting. I'm completely focused on what I'm doing. A lot to keep track of. Yeah, this is going to be a really washed out sky for the most part as you move away from the sunset itself. Drop in some more warm colors for the areas near the horizon. Trying to keep track of how wet my paper is and how much it's dried as I'm doing this. Paint right through these mountains. These mountains are kind of a warmish color, and this will show through underneath. Beautiful, beautiful. So nice. These are just such nice, pleasant colors. Add some more red to that sky above the sun. Okay, we're looking good so far. So let's just add a very faint wash of grayish something up here. So you don't really need to always be able to name what the color is. You just need to be able to understand if it's warm or cool, and understand which colors to mix in order to try to replicate it. That sky is pretty dang close to being done, I would say. I really don't want to mess with it too much more. I'm just trying to see if maybe I'll darken up this area a little bit, even though in the picture it's not darker, but I might just add a little. There will be like a harmony going, or a mirroring thing going on, a little cool here to mirror the coolness that's going to be everywhere else in the painting, if that makes sense. I like that. I like how that looks a lot. Remember, this photo right here, that's just a reference photo. I'm not copying it. I'm using it as inspiration for the scene. Okay, let's get into these really nice mountains. I'm going to come back and sharpen up the top of these peaks later. This is going to get painted over a few more times. I'm not actually adding that smoke effect just yet. This is setting the stage to be able to do that later. It's getting a little on the dry side. It's not completely dry, but I need this to stay wet so that the first wash is just one big wash and that it's clean and easy and effortless looking. And the cool colors will get more cool as they move away from the sun. And right here there's some purples going on, so I'll throw in some red for that. I'll mix it right on the paper. That's what's amazing about watercolor. You can actually mix on the paper itself. I just dropped this red straight from the palette right in here. You see that? Mix it right into that blue. Gives you kind of a purple color. One of the many magical things about watercolor. You can mix on the paper. I need to add some more warm colors all right here as that sun shines through the smoke. Again, this is all just what's going to be showing through what I paint over it. So I'm adding these colors now, because once I add darks, I can't really paint light colors on top of it unless I use gouache, which I may very well do. Nothing wrong with gouache. Gouache can be a painting saver if you need it to be. I'm really trying to be playful with the colors and just go crazy. I want this to be a very expressive painting, very evocative. Sometimes I can tend to be too cautious with my choice of colors, but as I gain confidence as an artist, as a painter, and as I gain a deeper understanding of what this medium does and how it works and how it behaves, the more freedom I feel like I have to play around and experiment. Alright. Now remember, this is all going to get way, way, way darker than this. This is only the first wash. Keep that in mind. It only gets darker from here. I'm just throwing in some cool colors for these trees here. Now I need to add some cools for the smoke in the foreground, or the midground rather. There's some subtle grays. And this is the area where the smoke turns warmer, so I'll leave that as warm right there. So the sun is kind of shining, and the rays are kind of moving out in equidistant arcs around the disc. Oh, this is looking really cool. So, as we're moving down, let's add some more cools, maybe a more neutral kind of cool. Add some burnt umber to that. Burnt umber and either cobalt blue or ultramarine blue are very good for mixing grays. You can also use burnt sienna, which is that reddish color I have on the palette. I usually go with burnt umber though, it's a little more neutral looking in my experience. Oh, there's also this little path here, if you look in the photo. This little path that winds its way up from the river. I want that to shine through, so I'm trying to not darken it. Hopefully the paint doesn't bleed onto it too much. Yes, yes, yes. This is looking great. So also the reason I decided to warm up this middle gray here, or the gray on this bank, is so that the cooler gray of the cliff will be pushed back into the scene. Things that are gray, that are more blue, appear farther away in painting. It's a way to give the illusion of distance and depth. Now this river, there are some color gradients happening, but it's a lot more subtle. So it's not quite as bright as the sky. Let's see, there's like some yellow, red, orange, something or other in the very middle, right under the sun. So we can just drop that in. cools off as it moves to either side. Looks like a more neutral kind of gray color. We'll just mix that right into the colors we already have on the palette. Just whatever's laying around. Don't be afraid to do that. Just mix in random colors. Make it random. Watercolor is great for randomness. I mean, you can see these little tendrils kind of blooming out over the top of the cliff. I didn't do that. The paint's doing that on its own. Let the watercolor do what it does. Learn to work with it and not try to control it. If you want to control the paint more, that's where painting wet on dry comes in, and that's where we'll be going in the next wash. So you see how every single color in this wash is all bleeding into the color next to it. Everything's bleeding together and fuzzing, and the paint is painting itself. It's mixing itself on the paper, and it's just beautiful. So while this is still fuzzy and wet, I'm gonna see if I can paint these background hills. This one is warmer because you've got these rays of the sun that are falling in front of it, and a little bit on this one too, but this one is especially warm. Oops, swipe that off. Now, one thing to consider when you're painting wet into wet, you don't want the paint you're putting down on the paper to be wetter than the paper. So if you're going to add more paint on top of this, you want your mixture to be thicker than what's underneath it, or you'll get cauliflower edges. I mean, if you want cauliflower edges, then that's totally fine, and sometimes you do want that, but I don't want that right now, so I'm trying to avoid them. Yeah, nice purpley color. Just this, whatever red that is, and then ultramarine. More on the red side, I think. More even than that. More of a plum color. Then I want to show a subtle gradient as it moves to the left, away from the sun. So we'll cool it off a little bit. Just having fun with it. Just having a lot of fun. I think I'm going to darken it up more, because I would like to not have to paint over these background hills again if I can manage it, so I need to go darker than I was. Maybe something like that. That looks a little better. Leaving room from that smoke that's going to be billowing up. And right about there, see if I can add some more cool to this. So just add some more of that ultramarine blue to this mixture. That'll be like a transitional color. Then at the very end, I'll go more just straight blue. Something like that should be good. I want these background mountains to be more faded so that they appear distant. Yeah, now we need to add these other peaks in the very far distance, like this one. These colors appear pretty vibrant right now, but they will become more subtle as the paint dries. Remember, watercolor dries a few shades lighter than it is when you first put it on the paper. So that's something to always keep in mind. So I'm just trying to decide where I want to start my second wash, because I need the top of this ridge to be very sharp. There's all these really beautiful jagged textures going on. And I think I might let this dry a little more before I do that. It's getting pretty close. But it needs to dry a little more, so I will be back in just a few minutes. Don't go anywhere. Alright. Looks like it's dry enough now. So I'm just going to mix up some really dark grays for this mountain here. Will this be a hill or a mountain? I don't actually know. It's shaped like a mountain. More the size of a small hill. So we'll just work from left to right, right to left, right to left. I know my directions, I promise. It's just hard to talk and paint at the same time. I'm getting better at it. It's definitely a skill that you have to learn. I don't really have a convenient setup to do voiceovers, so I just had to learn to do this. It's a good skill to have if I ever end up doing live demos or things like that. I'm going to cool this off as it comes down, just like I did in the underpainting. Oh, it's so rich and nice. And then this area will be warmer right here. This kind of little hill or ridge above the path, because that's a lot closer to the viewer. So I'm trying to be very deliberate and careful with the colors I'm using in this painting, because I really want to capture the essence of what's going on, and in order to do that, I have to get the colors right. So we'll just add some of those jagged tops. And it's all a silhouette, so I don't have to worry about any shading or anything like that. It's a very otherworldly scene. I can't even believe this is on this planet. It's actually amazing. These places are out there, though. They're real. And you can just go see them. I know I would love to. Cooling it off again. Notice how often I'm dipping back into different colors on my palette. I don't let myself stay with one color for too long. I always mix it up, add variations and little changes here and there. Makes it look more natural and interesting. Warming it back up as I go to the top, especially as it comes closer to that sun shining over. So just because this is a silhouette doesn't mean it's just one flat color. There is all kinds of variations going on. And if if I don't add those, it's going to look flat and boring. And it's not really going to portray the mood of this place. Drop in some reds here for this area where the sun is kind of shining through, especially down here, but there's a little bit happening right here too. Now remember, I'm going to end up lifting up a lot of this paint for that smoky effect, but this will still show through that. Even more red as it gets closer to the sun. Orange. I want the edge of this cliff to just be really bright. Like it's glowing. Drop some pure red right onto the paper there. Pretty thick paint. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. There's more of these little cliffs back in the distance, or something, whatever this is. I can't actually tell. In the picture, maybe buildings or something. Whatever it is, it's going to be orange. Now back into some of that purple as we move away from that brightly lit area. Cool it down some more. I do have to lift up some of this paint before it's dry. I think it's getting pretty close to being time to do that here. It's a really cool effect, and I think it's going to work out pretty well. Let's see. Yeah. There's going to be a lot of scrubbing going on, so I'm just going to scrub into the paper. You got to wash your brush fairly frequently when you're doing this so that you don't make it muddy. I'm kind of just erasing some of the paint that's there, and see if it's too wet, it'll just move around and it won't actually lift up. It has to be just the right amount of dryness. So I'm going to have to come do this again, I think. I can at least start. I say this ad nauseum in every video, but I do it because it's so important to understand that timing is everything. Timing is everything. So yeah, I'm gonna have to wait for just a minute more. So I'm gonna be keeping one eye on this while I continue with this middle value shape. Well, let's see, let's paint this area of land here above this path. Just checking to make sure the paper is dry enough, and I believe it is. Because I need to paint around this little trail leading up to the house. It's got water on it, which is reflecting the sun. And I think it looks really awesome. There's that bank of the river. The path ends right about there. So I'm going to try to paint around some of the shape of these plumes of smoke. I would love to do this without gouache, and I think I can do it. I think I can do it. I want to just get it right the first time and not have to go back with gouache. So it kind of goes up like that. That's the top of the plume right there. There's some orange bleeding into the top part of the plume. See if we can lift up some more on this side. That'll stay wet for a while longer, so it gives me some time to work on this side. That's too wet still. Yeah, that's a little better. See that? It's just lifting up more easily, and I'm kind of bracing it with my thumb so that I can really dig into it. Oh, that looks cool. That's really cool. I've never actually attempted to paint a smoky scene like this, so I'm happy it's working. I didn't know if it was going to work. Sometimes you just gotta go for it and see what happens. Let yourself experiment sometimes. I know it's intimidating, but the worst thing that could happen is you just have to start over. And just consider it a learning experience when that happens. Force yourself to ask yourself when a painting fails, like, why did it fail? What happened? What can I do differently? Then paint it again. I need to see if I can soften this. Yeah. There you go. That looks more like a plume of smoke to me. That's why this spare brush is so useful for blending and softening. So let's continue. I don't know if I'm going to do too much more to this side. I'm not sure yet. We'll see how it looks with the rest of the painting done. Painting smoke is actually just it's the same exact technique as painting clouds. It's no different. So if you can paint clouds, you can paint smoke. Painting some of this background foliage here. Yeah, I think that gets the idea across. Pretty happy with that. Just painting around the shape of that tree trunk right there. I need to touch back into this before it dries up. I want the entire middle value shape to flow into itself. I don't want to have to paint over any dry edges because then it won't look as fresh. You gotta always bounce back and forth between different areas of your painting. I need to fuzz the top of these trees a little bit so that smoke looks more convincing. Oh yeah, just like that. That's good. Yeah, so the top of that tree line is a little more indistinct. Add some texture to this water here. So I'm just using some dry brushing to indicate some of these ripples on the water surface. And I can go back and smooth it out if I feel like it needs it. In fact, I'm going to glaze over the whole, all of the water, I think. It's just a little too light. And we can leave some lighter dry brush areas left behind. That'll help give this water some texture. Something about like that. Let's see if I can drop in some warm on that plume of smoke right there. Probably some of this orange that's just on the palette. Just to give you the idea that the sun is shining through right there. So I just dropped a little on the paper, and then I'm going to take this same brush, which is just clean and damp, and I'll just move it around. Just very subtle. Yeah, something like that. Maybe lift up some smoke in this area too, if I can. Maybe not. This might be too dry. Yeah, that's good. Now, I just need to add a few areas, just a few areas of darker color. Maybe just along this bank. Maybe in some of the trees, but honestly, I'm not even sure if I'll do that. This is looking really good just as it is. We'll see. Just here and there, just adding some texture. Some of the texture you can kind of see in the picture. I actually like how there's that little area of land right here. Just drop that in. Darkening up the area around that path. I want it to pop out a little more. This is getting pretty close to being done, I would say. The water needs a little more texture just here and there. While it's still wet, I can drop some dark areas in here just to indicate some of those ripples. Not too much. That's about all I'm going to do for the water, I think. I'll throw some birds in the sky. Add some balance to this side of the frame. Also add some life and movement. Just here and there. As long as they look something like birds, you'll know what it is. You only need a few of them to actually be bird-shaped, and then the rest can just be squiggles and spots. Just looks like a flock of birds flying towards you from the distance. Alright, I'm going to call that a finished painting. I'm really happy with how this one turned out. I hope you enjoyed watching, I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you on the next one.